Welcome to KeepItReal Studios, the only channel on YouTube that keeps it real. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been around for quite a long time now. Now I kind of want to go into a little bit of detail, talking about some of the MCU projects that they have. When I say the word project, I'm more discussing the previous movies they've made in the past. So focusing on the movies that have 3 or more movies to them. So for example, Captain America, he has 3 movies. You know, all of those franchises have so many movies to them. And I feel like when it just in terms of MCU, there are a lot of movies that are loved by the fans. There are a lot of movies that are really hated. And there are a lot of movies that are just quite mediocre. But to me, I believe there are a lot of set of movies that are quite enjoyable, still fun to watch, and actually very underrated. That brings me to the topic of today's video. I'm just going to be ranking some of the most underrated MCU movies of all time. In the number 5 spot, I'm going to have to put Avengers, that came out in 2012, that was directed by Joss Whedon. The reason why I'm putting this in 5th place is overall, I do believe it's not that underrated of a movie in terms of just the whole MCU, but I feel like when you're looking into all the Avengers movies that you have, I believe it's kind of the most underrated. Just in terms of all the Avengers movies, nowadays everyone just looks at Infinity War and Endgame, because those 2 movies respectively are just huge game changers just for movies as a whole and just the franchise of the MCU. And obviously that's why it's so big and that's why everyone kind of gravitates towards those 2 movies. But the reason why I'm putting the first Avengers movie is because how well it is. Because I feel like it's such a good movie. Like if you actually go back and watch it, there's so much elements and the acting is on point. When all the characters just meet each other, how they're interacting and just their dialogue that is given to just the actors, and I feel like they do such a good job, and just the way it's shot and just how everything was back then in 2012. I feel like I'm just so nostalgic to it. I like how Hulk is such a feared monster and beast, and it's actually something that we worry about, and it's actually a huge part of the plot. Thor is still more of a serious character and isn't he as goofy, and Captain America is still trying to adjust to this new world, and Black Widow has the secrets. This movie has so many layers, and I feel like out of all the Avengers movies, it's just the one that is kind of the most forgotten. You know, it's kind of like the middle sibling, you know, kind of gets lost in the middle. That's why I'll have it in the number 5th position. Number 4 on this list, I'm going to have to put Captain America, the First Avenger. This was a movie that came out in 2011 and was directed by Joe Johnston. And overall, this movie is quite the timepiece. I feel like it's such a timeless classic. If you look back into the First Avenger, it's such a unique MCU movie because we're kind of going back in time, seeing how the world was before, seeing how it was back in that time, and just having like a superhero Captain America being the first soldier. It was so interesting because the way they just adapted that story into just going back into the past and still representing who Captain America is in the comics to the live action screen. I feel like they did such a good job in that manner. But just going into more detail about the movie, I feel like the plot is amazing, and just from the start of the movie, just being introduced to Steve Rogers, I feel like Chris Evans does a beautiful job in this movie. He feels like a real character. He feels believable and relatable, and I just like the elements in the show where he's shown to be a true soldier even before he takes the serum. That's something I really liked that they showed in the movie. And also just him, the fish out of water in the end, how he just has to adapt to everything that's changing all around him, and just I feel like it's so much smaller and how grounded it is. And I feel like this was just MCU at its finest before all the big CGI battles and monsters. That's why I really like the First Avenger. For number 3 on this list, I'm gonna have to give it to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This was a movie that came out in 2017 and was directed by James Gunn. This is definitely one of the most underrated MCU movies to me because I feel like Guardians of the Galaxy 2 was such a masterpiece. From just the casting to the music choice and just to the overall visuals of this movie, and the plot was just outstanding. First of all, just having Kurt Russell to play Peter Quill's father was amazing. But just going on, the elements of this movie was just so nice. I feel like it had a beautiful blend of just action, but also seriousness. Those are just some of the elements I love about this movie. And also in this movie you have Baby Groot. Like, I feel like that's enough said to have Guardians of the Galaxy at number 3 on this list. Number 2 on this list, I'm going to have to give it to Iron Man 3 that came out in 2013 and was directed by Shane Black. This is actually hard for me to even talk about because originally when this movie first came out, I wasn't even the biggest fan. I did not like it at all. I felt like they had such a good character starting off with the Mandarin, and just to do a plot twist like that and change everything, I wasn't the biggest fan of it. But now that I look back on it, I appreciate what they did. I appreciate the effort to going out of their way to kind of take away the cliche and add their own elements to it. And they also gave the other Mandarin a good reasoning to kind of want to get, revenge on Tony Stark and everything. I really like the stakes and the story that Tony went through as a character. Just Tony's progression throughout this movie and just the lessons that he learns and just the things that he has to deal with, because you feel like all the after effects of the previous movies that he's experienced culminates into this one movie. And I just think it was just an overall good movie, and it's also like a Christmassy kind of movie too. There's a lot of winter vibes to it, so I do kind of appreciate that as well. Before I get into the first place on this list, I want to talk about 2 movies first that I believe they deserve an honorable mention. Starting off, we have Thor, the movie that came out in 2011. Overall, I believe this movie is quite on the same level as the first Avenger. I feel like it's quite unique too as well, and just the outside world premise. And I do prefer the pre-CGI Thor and when he was more serious and a god, and Thor just like losing his powers. And there's a beautiful scene when he's just trying to pick up his hammer, and just the introduction of Hawkeye too. Overall, Thor is a good movie. And the second honorable mention would have to go to Spider-Man Far From Home. I believe this movie is a fantastic movie, especially just with Mysterio. I believe that was such a good villain choice. I've been waiting to see an accurate Mysterio come to life, and I did believe they did a very good job just with the visuals and just the illusions and the tricks and everything. Jake Gyllenhaal did a beautiful job playing Mysterio, and that's why I have it in an honorable mention. And in first place, I'm going to have to give it to the first Ant-Man movie that came out in 2015 and was directed by Peyton Reed. This, to me, is probably one of the most underrated MCU movies out there. If you're looking at the first one, it's very grounded and very realistic. The first movie was such a good starting point of Ant-Man and introducing him to the MCU. And I feel like Paul Rogers did a beautiful job playing Scott Lang. And I do like that it's not even Hank Pym, because Hank Pym, if you look in the comics, is quite a crazy one. So I did like the idea that they did Scott Lang instead. And just going into the movie more, I do like his relationship with his daughter. I think that's a very beautiful emotional aspect to the movie. And overall, it's just a well-rounded movie. I feel like all the actors do their job nicely. The characters mesh well with each other. The overall story, it's pretty simple, kind of basic, just learning to develop his powers in the new suit and become a superhero. It is quite a cliche story, but overall, it was still implemented very well. And that's why I have Ant-Man number 1 on this list. Overall, that's just my list of the top 5 ranking of the most underrated MCU movies out there. I genuinely believe that my list will change over time because there's so many MCU movies currently, and there's much more coming out very soon. So I know there's definitely going to be a lot of amazing movies and underrated movies, or even just unappreciated or even hated movies coming out soon. So I just wanted to kind of create a list as of right now, just expressing how I feel currently about some of these movies, because I do believe these movies are either forgotten or just not appreciated like they used to be back in the day. All of these movies on this list are just more realistic and grounded, and you can kind of relate to it. But overall, that'd be it for my video today. Please just comment down below how you feel about the MCU. Tell me some of your top 5 underrated MCU movies, top 5 favorite MCU movies. But that'd be it for today's video. Don't forget to keep it real.